The first human ship to arrive at Kepri Reach did not announce itself with fanfare or threat. It came in crooked, scarred by miscalculations and stress fractures, its hull patched with alloys that no other starfaring culture still bothered to use. The vessel drifted out of fold space with a shudder that rippled through the surrounding vacuum like a bruise forming beneath skin. Its drive field collapsed unevenly, and for several heartbeats it looked as though the craft might simply tear itself apart and scatter its passengers into the cold geometry of space. Instead, it stabilized, engines coughing like an exhausted animal that refused to lie down. Across Kepri Reach, sensors belonging to half a dozen species lit up in alarmed cascades. The Reach was not a place one entered accidentally. It was a carefully balanced knot of trade routes, ancient treaties, and mutually assured restraint, suspended between three minor spiral arms. The Reach had rules older than some civilizations, and the most important of them was that newcomers announced themselves well in advance. The human ship did not. It drifted, venting heat, broadcasting nothing but static and a repeating string of prime numbers that suggested either deliberate encryption or a distress beacon assembled by someone who did not trust language. The Council Observatory, a lattice of crystal and metal anchored to a dead moon, rotated to bring the ship into full view. Analysts murmured as they compared the incoming data against archived records of human engineering. The humans had been present on the galactic stage for less than 4 centuries, and already their reputation was contradictory enough to resist simple summary. They were resilient to a degree that unsettled species evolved for equilibrium. They escalated slowly, then all at once. They made alliances with an intensity that bordered on devotion, and they held grudges with a patience that frightened even the long-lived. Most of all, they endured. They endured losses that would have shattered older cultures, rebuilding with hands still shaking, eyes still fixed forward. The ship identified itself at last, not with a name, but with a statement rendered into the Reach's trade lexicon by an automated translator that clearly struggled with the syntax. "We are not here to claim. We are here because we were pushed." The words repeated 3 times, then cut off as the transmitter failed. Within the ship, gravity fluctuated like an indecisive tide. People clung to handholds or sat braced against bulkheads, teeth clenched as the artificial field dipped and surged. Captain Marrow Hale kept both boots planted on the deck, knees bent, spine straight. Hale had been born on a mining habitat with intermittent gravity and had learned early how to read the intentions of a floor that could not make up its mind. Hale did not shout orders. The crew knew their roles, and panic wasted air. The bridge smelled of hot metal and recycled oxygen. Consoles flickered, some displaying warnings that had been downgraded from catastrophic to merely dire. The ship had a name once, etched into its keel in letters worn thin by micrometeorite impacts. It was a word from an old human language meaning shelter under storm. Most of the crew avoided speaking it aloud, as if names carried expectations the ship could no longer fulfill. They had not planned to enter Kepri Reach. They had not planned to enter anywhere at all, not like this. Plans required time, and time had been taken from them in chunks measured by burning stations and collapsing orbits. The last human outpost beyond the Perseus Spur had fallen 6 weeks earlier, its evacuation incomplete, its warning too late. Whatever had pushed humanity outward with such violence did not pursue with speed. It pursued with inevitability. Hale looked at the forward display, where the Reach spread out in a delicate complexity of lights and vectors. This place was not prepared for refugees. It was prepared for negotiation, for controlled exchange, for the careful weighing of advantage. Hale knew the Council would be furious. Hale also knew fury could be weathered. Indifference could not. "Life support is holding," reported Kestrel Imani from the engineering pit, voice steady despite the tremor underfoot. "We can sustain for another 9 days at current load if nothing else fails." "That is 9 more than yesterday," Hale said. "Navigation." A pause, We are not in any recognized approach corridor, said Jun Parallax, fingers dancing over a console that predated his own birth. If we drift much longer, automated defenses may decide we are debris with ambitions. Then we stop drifting, Hale said. Bring us to a stable relative position and prepare to broadcast. Use plain language, no metaphors. The broadcast array sparked, then steadied. The translator hummed as it assembled meaning from probability. Hale spoke slowly, choosing words that could not be mistaken for threat or trick. To the governing bodies of this region, this vessel carries civilians and defense personnel of the human species. We are damaged. We request temporary harbor and the opportunity to speak. The message went out, riding photons across a web of listening posts and silent watchers. The waiting that followed stretched thin. Hale thought of the faces that had watched burning skies from evacuation barges, of hands pressed against viewport glass, of the way children learned too young that planets could die. On the observatory, the council convened in emergency session. Representatives projected themselves into a shared chamber, their forms rendered according to their own preferences and limitations. Some appeared as intricate avatars of light and geometry, others as more literal interpretations of their biology. At the center hovered the moderator, an ancient construct designed to prevent the Reach from tearing itself apart over misunderstandings. It listened, compiled, and spoke only when necessary. The humans have violated approach protocol, said the representative of the Thal Collective, a being of layered translucence and slow, deliberate motion. This sets a precedent we cannot allow. They are barely holding together, replied the Env from the Nakar clans, whose species prized hospitality as a form of honor. Precedents are flexible under disaster. We do not know the nature of the threat they flee, said another voice, sharp with suspicion. Harboring them may invite pursuit. The moderator's presence deepened, a subtle shift in the chamber's harmonics. We know this, it said. The humans endure pursuit without collapsing into chaos. This has been observed. Observation alone did not decide policy, but it shaped fear. The Reach had thrived because it balanced caution with curiosity. The humans represented both in equal measure, and that was dangerous. Back on the human ship, a minor explosion rattled the aft compartments, followed by a cascade of alerts. Hale did not flinch. Report, fuel manifold breach, Kestrel said. Contained, we are losing redundancy. Understood, Hale said. Keep it contained. Time dragged. The Reach's defenses tracked the ship with polite menace, their power signatures unmistakable. Hale imagined the conversation unfolding beyond the hull, the weighing of risk against principle. Hale had no illusions of moral leverage. The Reach owed humanity nothing. Survival had always been a solitary endeavor. The reply came at last, a composite signal threaded through multiple frequencies to ensure receipt. The translator rendered it with admirable clarity. Temporary harbor will be considered. You will disarm all external weapons and submit to inspection. You will not deploy additional vessels. You will accept a council delegation aboard your ship. Any deviation will be met with force. Hale exhaled, slow and controlled. We accept, Hale said. There was no mention of the word gratitude. Gratitude could sound like supplication, and supplication could be mistaken for weakness. Humans had learned that lesson the hard way. External weapons powered down, their systems going cold. The ship's posture shifted from wary to exposed, a vulnerability that made several crew members stiffen. Hale placed a hand flat against the console, feeling the vibration of the engines, the stubborn pulse of a machine that refused to die. We have come this far, Hale said quietly. We can stand still for a while. The council delegation arrived in a vessel so pristine it seemed sculpted rather than built. It docked with effortless precision, its systems interfacing seamlessly with the human ship's battered ports. When the airlock cycled open, the smell of alien atmospheres mingled with human recycled air, creating a sharp, unfamiliar tang. The delegation entered without ceremony. At its head was a being known as Selach of Four Winds, a representative whose species communicated through shifts in skin pattern and subtle changes in posture. The translator struggled, then adapted, projecting meaning into the shared auditory space. Selachov Fourwinds took in the damage with a glance that conveyed more calculation than pity. "You arrive unannounced, damaged, and pursued," Selachov Fourwinds said. "This places the Reach at risk." Hale met the gaze without flinching. "So did we," Hale said. "We still are." There was a pause, not silence but a moment dense with assessment. The Reach had expected pleas or demands or elaborate justifications. What it received was a simple statement of shared vulnerability. Selachov Fourwinds inclined its head, a gesture that in its culture acknowledged reality without conceding agreement. "You will explain what drives you," Selachov Fourwinds said. Hale nodded. "We will," Hale said, "but understand this first. We did not come to conquer. We came because we could not stop moving and remain alive." Behind Hale, the crew stood, weary but unbroken. Their eyes held the same expression the Reach's observers had catalogued in countless encounters with humanity. It was not defiance exactly. It was persistence, sharpened by loss, anchored by the unyielding belief that as long as hands could grasp tools and minds could imagine solutions, extinction was negotiable. The Reach had not prepared for that. Selachov Fourwinds did not sit. Its species rarely did, preferring a poised balance that allowed rapid shifts of posture to convey nuance. Instead, it anchored itself near the central table of the briefing chamber, its skin patterns rippling in slow gradients as it listened. The chamber itself was a compromise, retrofitted from a cargo bay into a space that could tolerate multiple atmospheres and gravities at once. The human ship had not been designed for diplomacy, but it adapted as it had adapted to everything else, by being just good enough to hold together under new demands. Hale stood opposite the delegation, hands clasped behind the back, posture relaxed but deliberate. Around them, members of the crew maintained stations at the edges of the room, ostensibly to monitor environmental controls, but also to bear witness. Humans understood the power of presence. They had learned, over generations of uneven negotiations, that being seen mattered almost as much as what was said. "You claim pursuit," Selachov Fourwinds said. "By whom?" "We do not have a name that translates cleanly," Hale said. "We have provisional designations, but none of them capture the problem. They are not a single polity, they are a process." The translator hesitated, then rendered the concept with a cluster of approximations that made several delegates shift uneasily. Processes were harder to deter than empires. Hale continued, voice even. "They consume infrastructure. They adapt to resistance faster than we can model. They do not negotiate because they do not perceive negotiation as a meaningful interaction. They strip systems of mass and energy, then move on." "Predators," said one of the delegates, a compact being whose species had evolved under constant ecological pressure. Its tone was sharp with interest. "In a sense," Hale said. "But predators leave ecosystems behind. This does not." Selachov Fourwinds' skin darkened along its flanks, a sign of concern. "You are describing an extinction vector," it said. "Yes," Hale said. "Ours first." The word first hung in the air, heavy with implication. The Reach's representatives were not naive. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, sometimes by miscalculation, sometimes by external force. But extinction vectors that moved outward, indifferent to borders, were rare. They tended to reshape entire regions before burning themselves out or being stopped at tremendous cost. "You have data," Selachov Fourwinds said. "You will share it." "We will," Hale said. "We already prepared a package. Sensor logs, material analyses, engagement records, everything we have." There was a flicker of surprise among the delegates. Many species hoarded information as leverage, especially in first contact under duress. Humans had learned, through painful trial, that information only had value if it could be acted upon in time. Hoarding delayed action. As the data transfer began, the chamber's displays filled with visualizations that transcended species-specific perception. Gravitational distortions mapped in false color, energy flows rendered as shifting topographies, timelines annotated with losses measured not just in tonnage, but in lives. The Reach's analysts absorbed the information in rapid, disciplined silence. "This explains your damage," Selach of Four Winds said at last. "You fought while retreating. We fought to buy time," Hale said, "for evacuations, for warning others. And did you succeed?" Hale's jaw tightened just enough to be visible. "Sometimes," Hale said, "enough to matter." The Reach valued proportionality. Sacrifice without measurable gain was considered wasteful. Sacrifice that altered outcomes was another matter entirely. Selach of Four Winds processed this, its posture shifting subtly as it recalibrated its assessment of the humans before it. "You have brought this danger to our doorstep," Selach of Four Winds said. "Yes," Hale said. "We tried not to." The simplicity of the response unsettled more than any elaborate defense might have. There was no attempt to deflect responsibility, only an acknowledgement of consequence. The Reach's representatives exchanged glances, some visible, some encoded in electromagnetic whispers. "What do you ask?" Selach of Four Winds said. "Time," Hale said. "Resources to repair enough to keep moving if we must. Access to your scientific networks so we can refine our understanding. And a place for our civilians to disembark if staying aboard becomes untenable." "That is more than temporary harbor," Selach of Four Winds said. "Yes," Hale said, "it is." The Reach did not give charity lightly. Its stability depended on careful reciprocity. Selach of Four Winds considered the human captain with eyes that saw not just the individual, but the weight of a species behind them. "What do you offer in return?" it asked. Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, Hale gestured, and Kestrel stepped forward, carrying a compact device sealed in layered shielding. She placed it on the table with reverent care. "This," Kestrel said, "is a compressed archive of human failure." The delegates reacted with confusion, then curiosity. Hale took over. "We offer you our mistakes," Hale said. "Our dead ends, our catastrophes. We have recorded them obsessively. We analyze where we broke, where we nearly broke, and where we adapted in ways we did not expect. We offer you the patterns of our resilience and our fragility." Selach of Four Winds' skin patterns stilled, a sign of intense focus. "You offer vulnerability as currency?" "Yes," Hale said. "Because we have learned that pretending invulnerability invites annihilation." The Reach had encountered species that offered technology, territory, even military service. Offering failure was unusual. It suggested a confidence not in perfection, but in recovery. The delegates conferred, their discussion rapid and layered. While they deliberated, life aboard the human ship continued its precarious rhythm. In the medical bay, overworked personnel tended to injuries accumulated over weeks of running engagements. There were burns from radiation spikes, fractures from sudden maneuvers, exhaustion etched into faces that had forgotten what rest felt like. Yet there was also a quiet competence, a refusal to collapse into despair. People spoke softly, shared rations, told practical stories about repairs that almost worked and evacuations that barely succeeded. In the civilian section, children were taught lessons improvised from whatever materials were at hand. Not lessons about history or art, which felt too fragile, but lessons about problem-solving, about how to identify when a system was failing and what to do next. Humans did not shield their young from reality. They taught them how to meet it. Back in the briefing chamber, Selach of Four Winds reached a decision. "The Council will grant you provisional harbor," it said. "You will be permitted to effect repairs under supervision. Your civilians may disembark to designated habitats. In exchange, you will integrate your data into our networks, and you will accept oversight on any research derived from it." Hale inclined the head, a gesture of respect that did not diminish authority. "We accept." "There is more," Selach of Four Winds said. "The Reach will not commit to open defense against this threat based solely on your testimony. We will observe. If pursuit manifests, we will respond according to our own priorities." Hale's expression did not change, That is all we ask, Hale said. Observe. The delegation departed soon after, leaving behind a ship that felt, for the first time in months, something like relief. It was not safety. It was a pause. Humans were adept at using pauses. Repairs began immediately. The Reach's engineers, cautious but curious, boarded the human ship to assess its systems. They found design philosophies that defied their expectations. Redundancy layered upon redundancy, components designed to fail gracefully rather than catastrophically, manual overrides everywhere. It was inelegant, heavy, and astonishingly resilient. Why not streamline? Asked one engineer, a being whose species prized minimalism to an almost spiritual degree. Because we do not know what will break next, Jun said, tightening a coupling with a tool that bore the marks of multiple generations of use. So we assume everything will. The engineer considered this, then nodded slowly. There was wisdom in assuming failure as a baseline. As days passed, human civilians disembarked into Reach habitats. The process was careful, monitored, and emotionally charged. Many had never seen a non-human up close before. Many had lost homes they would never return to. The Reach's citizens observed them with a mix of sympathy and unease. Humans carried their losses visibly, like scars worn without shame. One Reach habitat, a rotating cylinder filled with layered gardens and water channels, became home to several hundred human families. They adapted quickly, learning the rhythms of artificial day and night, the etiquette of shared space. They planted small patches of familiar plants in communal areas, not for yield, but for memory. The Reach noticed something else. Human children played games that involved cooperation under constraint, inventing rules that simulated scarcity and sudden change. They argued, adapted, and kept playing. Adults watched, occasionally intervening, but mostly allowing the process to unfold. Resilience was not taught as a slogan, it was embedded in play. Meanwhile, Hale and a small team began working with Reach scientists to analyze the data on the pursuing threat. The Reach brought formidable analytical tools to bear, models that could simulate entire star systems over millennia. The results were unsettling. The process Hale had described did not slow under resistance. It diverted, fragmented, and recombined. It exploited predictable defense patterns and ignored symbolic gestures of deterrence. It does not care who owns what, said a Reach analyst, its voice threaded with disbelief. It does not recognize sovereignty. No, Hale said, it recognizes gradients, energy, mass, complexity. It moves down the steepest slope. Then it will come here, the analyst said. Yes, Hale said again, eventually. The Reach faced a choice it had long deferred. Its strength lay in balance, in avoiding extremes, but some threats did not respect balance. They demanded commitment or retreat. Retreat, for the Reach, would mean abandoning the nexus that defined it. As the analysis deepened, a troubling realization emerged. The process did not merely destroy, it incorporated. Fragments of consumed infrastructure were repurposed, their materials and patterns integrated into new forms. It learned from what it dismantled. It is not mindless, Selach of Four Winds said, reviewing the findings. It is indifferent. Indifference is worse, Hale said. You cannot appeal to it. You can only outlast it or alter the environment it depends on. And can you do that? Selach of Four Winds asked. Hale did not hesitate. We think so, Hale said, but not alone. The Reach had survived by avoiding entanglement in others' wars, but this was not a war in any traditional sense. It was a test of whether cultures built on stability could adapt to relentless change. Humans had been forced into that adaptation prematurely, brutally. They had survived long enough to learn lessons others had not yet needed. The Council reconvened, this time with a broader mandate. The data from human failures circulated through the Reach's networks, provoking uncomfortable introspection. Many of the Reach's systems were optimized for efficiency, not resilience. They assumed cooperation among rational actors. The process did not qualify. Some argued for preemptive fortification, others for evacuation. A minority suggested leveraging the process, attempting to redirect it. The debates were intense, but beneath them ran a current of reluctant respect. The humans had not arrived begging or threatening. They had arrived bearing evidence and an invitation to prepare. On the human ship, now partially restored, Hale walked the decks, checking on crew and systems alike. The ship still bore its scars, but it hummed with renewed purpose. People smiled more easily. They slept a little longer. They planned. Kestrel joined Hale near the observation blister, where the Reach's intricate dance of vessels and habitats unfolded in luminous complexity. "Do you think they will help when it comes?" Kestrel asked. Hale watched a cluster of Reach ships maneuver with balletic precision. "Yes," Hale said, "not because of us, because they will understand that what we brought is not just danger, it is a warning. And if they decide to cut us loose," Kestrel said, "then we keep moving," Hale said. "We always do." Outside, far beyond the Reach's sensors, the process continued its patient advance, indifferent to borders, unhurried by resistance. It had encountered humans and learned from them as it learned from everything it consumed. It had not yet encountered what humans did when given time, allies, and a reason to stand. The Reach was about to find out as well. Preparation changed the Reach in ways that were subtle at first, then unmistakable. Trade lanes were recalculated to include fallback vectors. Habitats that had once optimized every cubic meter for comfort accepted structural reinforcements that reduced aesthetic harmony in favor of survivability. The Reach did not announce these changes publicly, framing them as routine upgrades, but its citizens felt the shift all the same. There was a new tension in shared spaces, an awareness that continuity was no longer assumed. Humans noticed the change immediately. They had lived with it for generations. Hale observed it in the way Reach officials asked more precise questions, in the way their scientists stopped seeking elegant solutions and began tolerating ugly but robust ones. Humanity's greatest unintended export was not technology or doctrine. It was mindset. Joint research hubs were established on the outskirts of the Reach, deliberately distant from population centers. Humans insisted on this, despite the logistical inconvenience. When asked why, Hale answered simply that proximity bred complacency. If something went wrong, distance bought time. The Reach accepted the reasoning, even as it chafed against instincts honed over millennia of controlled environments. In one such hub, suspended between two captured asteroids, a mixed team worked around the clock to test hypotheses derived from human failure archives. The data was vast and often contradictory, filled with abandoned approaches and half-successful adaptations. Reach scientists initially struggled with the volume. They were accustomed to pruning inefficiencies early, to discarding lines of inquiry that did not converge quickly. Humans did not discard, they catalogued. "You keep everything," said Tail under bright water, a Reach systems theorist whose species experienced time as overlapping probability bands. "Even the approaches that clearly did not work." "Especially those," said Myra Holt, a human analyst whose career had been defined by postmortems rather than victories. "Failure is contextual. What failed under one set of constraints might succeed under another." Tail under Brightwater processed this, its form shimmering as it recalibrated internal models. "This requires more storage," it said. "Yes," Myra said, "it also requires patience." Patience was something the Reach had in abundance. Urgency, less so. The advancing process changed that. Long-range sensors, tuned with human input to detect subtle gravitational anomalies, began to register disturbances beyond the Reach's periphery. They were faint, almost dismissible. The Reach had nearly dismissed them before, written them off as natural phenomena or instrument error. Now informed by human experience, they were flagged and tracked. The pattern was unmistakable. The process was closer than expected. The Council received the report in a closed session. Selachov forewinds stood before projections that showed the slow deformation of spacetime itself, as if something massive were dragging its fingers through the fabric of the galaxy. We are still not the primary gradient, it said, but we are no longer irrelevant. This confirms the human assessment, said another council member. Observation alone will soon become participation. The Reach faced a dilemma that cut to its core identity. It had been founded as a neutral nexus, a place where conflicts were moderated by distance and protocol. To fight was to take sides, to risk becoming a target not just of the process, but of political fallout among surviving neighbors. Yet neutrality offered no shield against indifference. The humans did not wait for the council to decide. They began preparing contingency plans for departure quietly but efficiently. Evacuation drills were run in human-populated habitats, framed as routine safety exercises. Ships were repositioned to allow rapid assembly into convoys. The Reach noticed and bristled. "You do not trust us," Selach of Four Winds said to Hale during a private exchange. "I trust you to act in your own interest," Hale replied. "So do we." This could be interpreted as a lack of commitment, Selach of Four Winds said. "It is a commitment," Hale said, "to survival, ours, and if you choose it, yours." The frankness was uncomfortable, but it was also clarifying. The Reach had long operated under the assumption that alignment required reassurance. Humans demonstrated that alignment could coexist with exit strategies. The first direct manifestation of the process, within observable range, occurred 3 weeks later. A distant, uninhabited system began to dim, its star's output distorted by massive energy extraction. Automated probes sent by the Reach ceased transmission mid-signal, their final data packets showing structures forming from the repurposed debris of planetary crusts and orbital installations long abandoned. The Reach's military assets, long maintained more as deterrent symbols than active forces, were mobilized. Their design emphasized precision strikes and disabling blows, doctrines shaped by centuries of limited conflict. Human observers watched the simulations with growing unease. "It will not respond the way you expect," Jun said during one briefing. "It will not prioritize what you consider vital." "We are aware," said a Reach commander. "We have reviewed your data." "Yes," Jun said. "But reviewing and internalizing are different processes." The Reach commander bristled, then paused. "Explain." Jun pulled up a comparative analysis. "Your doctrine assumes an adversary that values continuity of command, preservation of assets, and predictable responses to threat escalation. This process values none of those. It will absorb losses if the net gradient remains favorable." "Then what do you suggest?" the commander asked. "Area denial," Jun said. "Not of space, but of utility. You have to make the region less valuable to it than alternative paths." "You propose sacrificing systems," Selach of Four Winds said. "I propose choosing which systems are sacrificed," Hale said, stepping in. "We learn the hard way that trying to save everything means losing control over what you lose." The Reach recoiled at the idea. Its culture prized preservation, continuity, the careful curation of environments over deep time. Deliberate sacrifice felt like vandalism of the future, yet the data was unambiguous. Attempts to defend every node diluted response and accelerated collapse. Debate raged. While it did, the process continued its approach, patient and unpressured. On a Reach habitat that housed a large human population, a crisis erupted that crystallized the stakes. A structural fault, unrelated to the external threat, propagated through a load-bearing ring, threatening catastrophic decompression. Reach engineers responded according to protocol, sealing sections, and prioritizing core systems. Human residents responded differently. Without waiting for authorization, human volunteers moved to reinforce the failing structure with improvised supports, redirecting power manually and evacuating non-essential areas with ruthless efficiency. They accepted personal risk without hesitation, not as heroes but as problem solvers. Several were injured. None hesitated. When the crisis passed, the habitat remained intact, though scarred. The Reach's administrators were forced to acknowledge that human methods, while disorderly, had saved more lives and infrastructure than protocol alone would have allowed. "Your people disregard procedure," said the Habitat Overseer to Hale afterward. "Yes," Hale said, "when procedure becomes an obstacle, this is dangerous," the Overseer said. "So is rigidity," Hale said. The incident circulated through the Reach's networks, sparking uncomfortable discussions. Procedure existed for a reason, but so did adaptation. Humans embodied the latter to a degree that unsettled those who had not been forced into it. The first skirmish with the process occurred at the edge of the sacrifice zone the Reach reluctantly approved. Several lightly populated systems were stripped of infrastructure, their mass redirected or dispersed to reduce gradient attractiveness. When the process arrived, it encountered a region of low utility and fragmented resources. It slowed, not stopping but altering trajectory. The Reach's observers watched in stunned silence as the models adjusted in real time. Human analysts nodded grimly. "It worked," Myra said. "For now." Celebration was muted. The price had been high. Entire histories were erased, archives destroyed, habitats abandoned. The Reach mourned collectively, a ritualized expression of loss that reaffirmed shared identity. Humans participated without irony. They knew mourning did not preclude preparation. The process adapted as expected. New structures formed, optimized for lower density extraction. The reprieve was temporary, but temporary mattered. "You have given us time," Selach of Four Winds said to Hale. "You gave it to yourselves," Hale said. "We just suggested how." The Council faced a turning point. Neutrality was no longer tenable. The Reach could either continue reactive measures, bleeding value with each adaptation, or commit to a more radical approach informed by human experience. That approach emerged from an unlikely source, the Human Failure Archive. Buried among accounts of lost colonies and failed defenses was a cluster of experiments humanity had abandoned as too dangerous, too disruptive to pursue under normal conditions. Concepts involving deliberate destabilization of spacetime gradients, the creation of regions the process could not efficiently traverse without incurring unacceptable cost. "You shelved these," Selach of Four Winds said, reviewing the proposals. "Yes," Hale said, "because implementing them would have required sacrifices we were not ready to make, and because we were alone." "You are not alone now," Selach of Four Winds said. "No," Hale agreed. "You are here." The implication was heavy. The Reach possessed resources and coordination humanity had never enjoyed in its early encounters with the process. Together, they might attempt what humans could not, reshaping the environment on a scale that challenged the process's fundamental assumptions. "This will alter the Reach permanently," said one council member. "We will not be what we were. You will exist," Hale said, "which is more than can be said for some alternatives." The Reach deliberated for a full cycle, its longest recorded emergency session. In the end, the decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Reach would commit to a joint strategy, one that embraced controlled sacrifice, adaptive defense, and a willingness to endure instability for the sake of survival. The announcement was made carefully, framed not as a declaration of war, but as a restructuring of priorities. Some citizens protested, others volunteered. The Reach did not fracture, but it flexed in ways it never had before. Humans integrated into the effort seamlessly, their experience with scarcity and crisis making them effective liaisons and planners. They did not dominate. They advised, cautioned, and when ignored, prepared contingencies. As the first large-scale implementation began, Hale stood once more at the observation blister, watching Reach and human vessels assemble in patterns that defied old doctrines. The ship beneath Hale's feet vibrated with purpose, systems pushed beyond intended parameters but holding. Kestrel joined Hale, her expression a mix of exhaustion and fierce focus. "Do you think this will be enough?" she asked. Hale watched the distant shimmer of distorted spacetime where the first gradient destabilizer activated. "No," Hale said, "but it will teach us what to try next." Humanity's greatest weapon had never been firepower or technology alone. It was iteration. Fail, learn, adjust, repeat. The Reach was learning that lesson now, not from textbooks or simulations, but from standing alongside a species that had survived by refusing to accept that any single failure was final. Far out in the dark, the process encountered something new. Not resistance in the traditional sense, but an environment that changed faster than it could comfortably exploit. It slowed, recalculated, adapted. For the first time since it had begun its long consumption, it faced not a wall, but a moving landscape shaped by minds that understood loss and persisted anyway. The outcome was uncertain. The cost would be high. But uncertainty was something humans had learned to live with. And now, the Reach was learning too. The Reach did not sleep once the joint strategy moved from theory into sustained action. Its rhythms changed, cycles overlapping in ways that blurred the distinction between emergency and normality. Where once the Reach had prized equilibrium, now it cultivated responsiveness. This was not a simple cultural shift. It was a stress applied to every institution, every assumption about how a civilization should behave when pressed. Human advisors embedded themselves throughout Reach command structures, not as authorities, but as translators of experience. They did not issue proclamations. They asked uncomfortable questions. What happens when this fails? What do you lose if it works imperfectly? How quickly can you change direction without breaking yourselves? The Reach found these questions irritating, then indispensable. The first destabilization zones proved effective, but volatile. They warped local spacetime just enough to make the process's extraction inefficient, increasing the cost of traversal and forcing rerouting. However, these zones also strained nearby infrastructure and disrupted long-established navigation heuristics. Ships misjudged distances. Habitats experienced tidal stresses they were never designed to endure. The Reach paid for every moment gained with material loss and collective unease. Where humans differed from the Reach was not in their tolerance for loss, but in how they metabolized it. When a destabilization zone collapsed prematurely, consuming a Reach research outpost along with 3 human support vessels, the Reach entered formal mourning protocols that halted non-essential operations across multiple sectors. Humans mourned as well, but they did not stop working. They recorded the failure, salvaged what data they could, and began designing the next iteration before the echoes of the collapse had fully dissipated. This divergence sparked friction. "You act as though grief is an inconvenience," accused a Reach cultural delegate during a tense coordination meeting. "No," Myra said, voice tight but controlled. "We act as though grief is inevitable. Stopping does not honor the dead if stopping lets more people die." The Reach delegate recoiled, not from the logic but from the bluntness. Reach culture treated loss as a communal anchor, a moment to reaffirm shared values. Humans treated loss as a data point that demanded response. Neither approach was wrong. Together, they formed an uneasy but potent balance. The process responded to the destabilization zones with adaptations that surprised even human analysts. It began shedding mass preemptively, fragmenting itself into semi-autonomous structures that could traverse warped regions with reduced penalty. These fragments reassembled on the far side, not seamlessly, but effectively enough to continue extraction. "It is learning faster," Tail under Brightwater observed, its probability bands shimmering with unease. "It always does," Jun said. "The question is whether it can learn faster than we can change." That question drove the next phase of the joint strategy. Instead of static zones, they began experimenting with mobile destabilizers mounted on human and Reach vessels alike. These devices generated shifting gradients that altered the environment dynamically, making it difficult for the process to settle into optimized patterns. The concept was risky. A miscalculation could tear a ship apart or strand it in a region of hostile physics. Humans volunteered first. "This is unacceptable," protested a Reach fleet coordinator. "Your vessels are already damaged. Your people are not expendable." Hale met the coordinator's gaze without flinching. None of us are expendable, Hale said, but some of us are practiced. Practice mattered. Human crews had flown ships through conditions that would have grounded most Reach pilots, relying on layered redundancies and a willingness to accept partial failure. When the first mobile destabilizer was tested, mounted to the human ship that had first arrived in the Reach, it nearly tore the vessel in half. Structural members screamed under stress. Gravity inverted twice in less than a second. 3 compartments were lost to vacuum. The ship held, data poured in, raw and invaluable. The destabilizer worked, not just as a deterrent, but as a lure. The process redirected toward the moving gradient, drawn by the promise of efficiency that dissolved as it approached. For precious minutes, it stalled, recalculating in the face of an environment that refused to stabilize. The Reach watched, transfixed. This was not a battle in any traditional sense. There were no decisive blows, no clear fronts. There was only pressure applied and reapplied, adaptation meeting adaptation. The cost was immediate. The human ship was crippled beyond easy repair. Hale ordered evacuation of non-essential personnel, transferring them to Reach vessels under fire from fragmentary structures, the process shed in irritation. 2 Reach ships were lost covering the withdrawal, their crews choosing collision courses with destabilized regions rather than allow the fragments to slip past. When the dust settled, the process had retreated, its trajectory altered once more. The Reach had bought time measured in weeks rather than days. The price was written in wreckage and names added to memorial registries that grew longer with each engagement. Selach of Four Winds addressed the council in a tone that blended resolve with mourning. "We can no longer pretend this is an external problem," it said. "The Reach is now part of the gradient." That admission changed everything. Emergency authorities were granted powers that would have been unthinkable cycles earlier. Resource allocation shifted from optimization to survivability. Long-standing disputes over trade imbalances were suspended. The Reach began to behave less like a market and more like a collective organism under threat. Humans recognized the signs. They had lived through similar transitions when bureaucratic inertia gave way to grim pragmatism. They offered guidance sparingly, aware that the Reach needed to own its transformation to survive it. One of the most controversial measures involved the intentional collapse of a minor trade nexus, a hub that had served as a cultural crossroads for centuries. Analysis showed that its mass and energy density made it an irresistible target for the process's next approach. Defending it would require resources better used elsewhere. The debate was fierce. Citizens protested. Historians argued that the loss would erase irreplaceable heritage. Humans listened, grimly familiar with the arguments. Hale spoke only once during the deliberation. "You can build new places," Hale said. "You cannot build them if you are gone." The Nexus was evacuated under heavy guard. As the last ships departed, automated systems triggered a cascade that dispersed the hub's mass into a diffuse cloud, rendering it useless to the process. When the process arrived, it slowed, probed, and moved on, frustrated. The Reach mourned, but it also noted that the sky did not fall. Life continued. New patterns formed. This realization sparked a deeper shift. The Reach began to explore not just defensive adaptations, but cultural ones. Education systems incorporated human case studies on crisis management. Children learned that stability was a goal, not a guarantee. Art emerged that grappled with impermanence, a theme previously considered unsettling. Humans, for their part, found themselves changed by the Reach. Exposure to a civilization that had thrived on long-term planning and cooperative restraint tempered some of humanity's more destructive instincts. Human strategists began to consider not just what could be sacrificed, but what should be preserved at all costs to maintain identity and morale. The synthesis was imperfect, but it was real. As months passed, the joint effort achieved something no single species had managed alone. The process was not stopped, but it was slowed enough that its advance became predictable. Its adaptations followed discernible patterns. For the first time, long-range models showed scenarios in which the process could be contained within a region, its expansion constrained by an environment deliberately engineered to resist efficient consumption. "This is containment," Selach of Four Winds said during a rare moment of cautious optimism. "Not victory, but survival." "Survival is underrated," Hale said. The human ship that had served as the first mobile destabilizer was beyond repair. Its hull was twisted, its systems cannibalized to keep other vessels operational. The crew gathered one last time aboard it, retrieving personal effects and mementos. Hale walked the decks slowly, hand brushing scorched bulkheads, remembering the first arrival at the Reach, the uncertainty, the fragile hope. When the ship was finally scuttled in a controlled collapse, its mass dispersed into a pattern calculated to confuse the process's sensors. Hale watched without ceremony. Ships were tools. Survival was the mission. In its place, a new class of joint human reach vessels began construction. They incorporated reach elegance and human redundancy, modular systems designed to fail in pieces rather than all at once. Their purpose was not to fight in a conventional sense, but to shape the battle space, to keep the process off balance. The Reach's citizens watched these ships take form with a mixture of apprehension and pride. They were symbols of a future that was less certain but more resilient. Not everyone agreed with the path taken. A separatist movement emerged, arguing that the Reach had compromised its principles by adopting human pragmatism. They advocated for withdrawal, for sealing borders and abandoning contested regions. The Council allowed the debate to unfold, even as it prepared countermeasures in case the movement turned violent. Humans observed this with weary familiarity. Internal dissent was another constant of survival. Hale advised restraint. "Do not make enemies where you can make arguments," Hale said. "But be ready if arguments fail." The process, indifferent to politics, pressed on. Its fragments probed the edges of containment zones, testing for weakness. Each test taught the joint forces something new. Each engagement refined their approach. The cost remained high. Lives were lost. Places were abandoned. But something else grew alongside the losses, confidence born not of certainty, but of demonstrated adaptability. In a quiet moment, Selach of Four Winds asked Hale a question it had avoided until then. "When your species first encountered this process," it said, "did you believe you would survive it?" Hale considered before answering. "No," Hale said, "we believed we would try." The Reach had once believed survival was a given, a function of balance and foresight. Now it understood survival as an ongoing act, a series of choices made under pressure. In that understanding, it found common ground with humanity. The galaxy did not become safer, but within the Reach, something hardened and clarified. They were no longer merely a place, they were a stance. And the process, encountering resistance that refused to settle into predictable forms, began to change in ways its own internal logic struggled to accommodate. The longer the containment held, the more dangerous complacency became. Humans recognized the pattern immediately, even as the Reach struggled against it. When disaster stretched out over time instead of striking all at once, attention frayed. Emergency measures began to feel routine, losses blurred into statistics. Hale worked deliberately to counter this, insisting on regular reviews that forced leadership to confront not just progress, but fragility. "Survival does not mean winning," Hale reminded the Council during one such session. "It means not losing yet." The Reach did not love this framing, but it accepted its accuracy. Containment zones held, mobile destabilizers disrupted advance vectors, and the process remained constrained to a region that expanded only marginally despite constant pressure. For the first time since the human arrival, long-term projections extended beyond immediate catastrophe. That extension revealed a new problem. The Reach could survive this way, it could not thrive. Trade had slowed to a crawl, cultural exchange stagnated. Habitats devoted more mass to shielding and redundancy than to growth. The Reach's defining identity as a nexus of connection was eroding under the weight of defensive necessity. Some council members argued this was acceptable. Others feared a slow death of purpose, even if physical survival was secured. Humans understood this tension intimately. They had endured centuries where survival consumed all ambition, where art, exploration, and curiosity became luxuries postponed indefinitely. Many of their own historical collapses had followed not immediate extinction, but exhaustion. Myra Holt presented the uncomfortable analysis. If we continue like this, she said, the process will not be the only thing that destroys us. We will do it ourselves by narrowing until there is nothing left worth defending. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. Selach of Four Winds finally spoke. You suggest expansion, it said, at a time when contraction is our only proven defense. I suggest redefining expansion, Myra said. Not in territory, in complexity. The idea was counterintuitive. The process exploited gradients of mass and energy, seeking efficiency. What it struggled with were environments that changed too quickly, that resisted optimization. Humans proposed leaning into that weakness not just tactically, but systemically. Instead of fortifying static zones, they would seed controlled unpredictability across the Reach. Infrastructure would be designed to reconfigure itself on timescales shorter than the process's adaptation cycles. Trade routes would shift dynamically. Habitats would alter energy profiles, redistributing loads in patterns that defied long-term modeling. This will be inefficient, protested a Reach economic coordinator. Yes, Jun said, that is the point. Efficiency had been the Reach's strength. It had also been its vulnerability. The process thrived on predictable gradients, on systems optimized into smooth curves of utility. Humans had learned painfully that inefficiency could be armor. Implementing this vision required a level of trust the Reach had never extended to any external influence. It meant loosening centralized control, allowing local systems to experiment, fail, and adapt within broad constraints. It meant accepting messiness as a feature rather than a flaw. Resistance was fierce. Entire guilds and institutions argued that such changes would unravel centuries of refinement. The separatist movement gained momentum, framing the proposal as cultural capitulation. Humans watched carefully, aware that pushing too hard could fracture the alliance. Hale chose to speak directly to the Reach's population for the first time, addressing them through a distributed broadcast translated into dozens of perceptual frameworks. Hale did not appeal to fear. Fear was already present. You are being asked to change, Hale said, not because you were wrong, but because the universe changed around you. We were asked the same, many times. Each time we lost something we loved. Each time we learned what we could not afford to lose again. Hale spoke of human cities abandoned, languages that faded, traditions rewritten, not as warnings, but as context. You do not have to become us, Hale said. You only have to accept that stability is something you build every day, not something you inherit. The response was not unanimous acceptance, but it shifted the tone. Debate moved from whether change was necessary to how much and how fast. Pilot programs launched in peripheral sectors. Habitats experimented with modular living spaces that reconfigured weekly. Trade collectives adopted randomized routing algorithms. Energy grids incorporated stochastic fluctuation layers that deliberately introduced noise into consumption patterns. The process reacted with visible confusion. Its advance slowed further, not because the Reach had become stronger in a traditional sense, but because it had become harder to read. The process probed, withdrew, probed again, its fragments wasting effort on gradients that dissolved before they could be exploited. This success came with costs. Accidents increased. Systems failed in unexpected ways. People died not from direct engagement with the process, but from internal mishaps caused by complexity pushed too far, too fast. The Reach mourned these losses bitterly. Critics seized on them as evidence of human recklessness. Humans did not dispute the cost. They argued that cost without extinction was still acceptable. The tension nearly broke the alliance when a major Reach archive habitat suffered a catastrophic internal reconfiguration failure. Centuries of accumulated knowledge were lost in seconds, data structures corrupted beyond recovery. The habitat survived, its memory did not. The outcry was immediate and visceral. Historians demanded accountability. Separatists called for the expulsion of humans. The council wavered. Selach of Four Winds summoned Hale privately. Its skin patterns were dark, tight with barely contained emotion. "You told us loss was inevitable," it said. "You did not tell us it would be like this." Hale did not deflect. "Because if I had," Hale said, "you might not have tried, and then you would lose everything instead of something. This archive defined us," Selach of Four Winds said. "You are still here," Hale said, "which means you still define yourselves." The words did not heal the wound, but they reframed it. After a long moment, Selach of Four Winds straightened. "If we continue," it said, "we must do so with clearer boundaries. We will not sacrifice identity indiscriminately." Hale nodded. "Nor should you. Survival without identity is just delay." The joint strategy adjusted. Core cultural anchors were designated as non-negotiable, insulated from the most aggressive reconfiguration. Around them, adaptive zones absorbed the brunt of unpredictability. The Reach learned to choose what it would never give up, and what it was willing to let change beyond recognition. Humans respected this deeply. They had learned too late, in some cases, what they should have protected at all costs. As containment matured into something closer to coexistence, another realization emerged. The process was not infinite. Its adaptations showed diminishing returns. Each new adjustment consumed internal complexity, making future changes slower, more resource-intensive. "It is burning itself," Tail under Brightwater observed, "not in energy, but in options." The process had evolved to exploit stable systems. Faced with a landscape that refused to settle, it was forced into constant recalculation. That recalculation carried cost. This opened a possibility humans had not dared to voice before. Not destruction, not victory, exhaustion. "We cannot kill it," Myra said during a high-level briefing, "but we might be able to make existing here not worth the effort." The Reach understood the implication. If the process could be contained, slowed, and starved of efficient gradients long enough, it would divert elsewhere, seeking easier regions of the galaxy. The Reach would not eliminate the threat. It would redirect it. This was ethically fraught. Redirecting the process meant condemning other regions to face it sooner. The Reach had long prided itself on not exporting danger. "We did not create this," Hale said quietly, "and we cannot carry it alone." The Council wrestled with the decision. In the end, it chose transparency. Warnings were broadcast beyond the Reach, data shared freely, human failure archives included. The galaxy would not be caught unaware as humanity had been. Some would listen, some would not. Humanity knew this pattern too. As the processes advanced, slowed to a crawl, joint forces pushed the adaptive strategy harder, deliberately increasing environmental volatility along the most likely future vectors. The process responded sluggishly, its fragments less cohesive, its reassemblies imperfect. Losses continued, but they decreased. For the first time, there were cycles with no new names added to memorials. In one such cycle, Hale walked through a Reach habitat garden that had been replanted after repeated reconfigurations. The plants were unfamiliar, hybridized, selected not for beauty, but for resilience. Yet they thrived, forming patterns no designer would have planned. Selach of Four Winds joined Hale, observing the growth. "We are no longer what we were," it said. "No," Hale agreed. "But you are something that can last." The Reach had become harder, messier, more alive in ways it had not anticipated. Humans had found something too, a place where their lessons, bought with blood and loss, had meaning beyond their own survival. Far from the Reach, the process altered course, not dramatically, but decisively. Its advance vector bent away, seeking regions where gradients promised easier returns. It did not flee, it optimized. The Reach did not celebrate. It watched, wary, prepared for the possibility that optimization might reverse. But as cycles passed, confidence grew. The process was still out there. It always would be. But it was no longer inevitable here. Human ships began to depart, not in flight, but by choice. Some crews stayed, integrating into Reach society. Others carried what they had learned onward, answering distant calls for help sparked by the shared warnings. When Hale prepared to leave, Selach of Four Winds asked one final question. If we had refused you harbor, it said, what would you have done? Hale considered, then answered honestly. We would have kept moving, Hale said, and you would have faced this alone. The Reach understood the weight of that answer. Survival, it had learned, was not just about strength or foresight. It was about recognizing when endurance itself was something worth sharing. The galaxy remained dangerous, but it was no longer indifferent. The Reach did not return to what it had been, and in time it stopped trying. The habits of vigilance, of adaptive design and cultural flexibility settled into something like muscle memory. What had begun as emergency measures became inherited practice. Children born during the years of containment grew up assuming that corridors might change, that schedules were provisional, that plans were hypotheses subject to revision. They were not anxious about it. They were fluent in it. Humans recognized the signs of a civilization that had crossed a threshold. The Reach was no longer brittle. The process continued elsewhere. Reports filtered in through long-range relays and indirect contacts. Some regions heeded the warnings broadcast by the Reach and humanity together. Others dismissed them as exaggerated or too costly to prepare for. In those regions, the process advanced faster, feeding on familiar patterns of efficiency and optimization. The Reach tracked these developments with a mixture of sorrow and grim resolve. It could not save everyone. It could only refuse to become easy prey again. Humanity fragmented outward, as it always had, but with something new carried in its diaspora. Not just technology or cautionary tales, but a lived example of partnership across profound difference. Where human ships arrived now, they did not arrive only as refugees. They arrived as instructors in endurance, bearing records not just of how to fight, but how to change without erasing oneself. Captain Marrow Hale did not return to human core space. The ship Hale commanded no longer existed, and the role Hale had filled had become less necessary. Instead, Hale accepted a position that would have been unthinkable at the start of the crisis: permanent liaison between the Reach and the expanding web of civilizations now aware of the process. The role was not ceremonial. Hale traveled constantly, moving between cultures at different stages of readiness, translating not just language, but expectations. Hale explained why no single solution would suffice, why resilience had to be local and iterative, why some losses could not be prevented and had to be survived. Not everyone listened. Some tried to impose rigid doctrines, demanding exact blueprints. Hale refused to provide them. If you copy what we did, Hale told one such delegation, you will fail differently, but you will still fail. You have to learn how to learn. That refusal cost humanity influence in some quarters. Hale accepted that too. Influence that depended on obedience was brittle. Within the Reach, Selach of Four Winds oversaw a council that looked very different from the one that had first debated granting harbor. New voices had joined, including non-Reach observers given limited standing. Humans held no formal seats by design, but their presence permeated proceedings, not as dominance, but as reference. When disputes arose over resource allocation or risk tolerance, someone inevitably asked, how would the humans approach this? Not because humans were always right, but because they were unafraid to articulate trade-offs others preferred to obscure. The separatist movement did not vanish. It matured. Some of its members departed, founding enclaves beyond the Reach that sought to preserve older ways in isolation. The Reach did not stop them. It offered data, warnings, and a standing invitation to return. Some enclaves thrived briefly, others did not. The Reach recorded the outcomes without judgment, adding them to the growing archive of lived experiments. One such enclave surprised everyone by developing a novel approach to the process, exploiting a quirk in its fragmentation behavior to create decay gradients that led it into low-resource dead zones. The enclave shared its findings freely, having learned from the Reach that secrecy delayed collective adaptation. The Reach incorporated the technique, refining it further. This feedback loop became the Reach's defining strength. It was no longer merely a place where goods and ideas passed through. It was a place where failures were examined without shame and successes were treated as provisional. Years passed, not quietly but steadily. The process did not return to the Reach in force. It brushed the edges of adaptive zones occasionally, testing, probing, then moving on. The cost of entry had become too high. Other regions offered easier returns. The galaxy's balance shifted, subtly but permanently. Civilizations that survived the process's advance tended to share certain traits, regardless of biology or culture. They tolerated inefficiency. They decentralized authority. They educated their young not in static truths, but in methods of revision. They mourned openly and worked anyway. Historians would later argue about where these traits originated, about whether humanity deserved credit or merely happened to be the first to encounter the process and live long enough to articulate lessons. Hale never engaged in those debates. Attribution mattered less than transmission. On a quiet Reach station overlooking a deliberately chaotic nebular flow, Hale met Selach of Fourwinds one last time. The station itself was an example of the new philosophy, its structure asymmetrical, its energy flows constantly rebalanced. It should have felt unstable. Instead, it felt alive. "You are leaving," Selach of Fourwinds said, not as a question. "Yes," Hale said. "There are other places that need this conversation. You could stay," Selach of Fourwinds said. "You have earned that right." Hale smiled faintly. "We never wanted to stay," Hale said. "We wanted somewhere to stand long enough to help." Selach of Fourwinds' skin patterns shifted in a complex expression that combined gratitude and something like melancholy. "You changed us," it said. "You changed yourselves," Hale replied. "We just showed you what change looks like under pressure." They stood together, watching traffic flow through the Reach. Ships moved in patterns that would have baffled earlier navigators, routes shifting in real time, convoys forming and dissolving organically. There was inefficiency everywhere. There was also resilience. "When we first met," Selach of Fourwinds said, "I believed your species to be reckless." "We are," Hale said. "And yet," Selach of Fourwinds continued, "that recklessness was bounded by something we did not recognize at the time. Responsibility," Hale said. "We break things, but we keep track of what we break." Selach of Fourwinds inclined its head. "That may be the difference between destruction and endurance." Hale departed the Reach aboard a modest vessel, purpose-built for long journeys and rapid adaptation. Its design bore the marks of joint influence, elegant in some aspects, brutally redundant in others. Its crew was small, drawn from multiple species, united not by flag or creed, but by a shared tolerance for uncertainty. As the ship slipped into fold space, Hale looked back once, watching the Reach recede into a complex knot of light and motion. It was no longer the pristine nexus it had once been. It was better. Elsewhere, in regions where the process continued its advance, new stories unfolded. Some ended in loss, others in narrow escapes, a few in unexpected resilience. The process remained vast, indifferent, and dangerous. It had not been defeated. It had been taught, in a limited way, that some prey fought back not by striking harder, but by refusing to be predictable. Humanity's place in the galaxy shifted subtly as a result. No longer merely a young, volatile species scrambling for survival, it became something like a catalyst. Where humans passed through, systems destabilized briefly, then reformed stronger. This reputation unsettled older powers, but it also attracted those who understood that stability without adaptability was an illusion. On one distant world, a civilization newly alerted to the process studied the shared archives late into its nights. Among the data were recordings of human settlements lost and rebuilt, of reach habitats reconfigured and preserved, of strategies abandoned and revived. One young researcher paused over a particular entry, a simple statement recorded early in the crisis. "We are not here to claim. We are here because we were pushed." The researcher understood then that survival was not always a choice. Sometimes it was a response. What mattered was how that response reshaped those who endured. Back in human space, children learned about the Reach not as a refuge, but as a turning point. They learned that the galaxy was not divided neatly into safe and dangerous places, but into systems that adapted and systems that did not. They learned that help could be offered without conquest, that alliances could form without erasing difference. They also learned that nothing stayed solved forever. Hale's ship emerged from fold space near a cluster of stars that glimmered with untested potential and unmeasured risk. A signal awaited, fragmented and imprecise, carrying the hallmarks of a civilization just beginning to understand that something vast was moving toward it. Hale did not sigh. Hale did not smile. Hale signaled acknowledgement and set a course. The gravity of unyielding hands was not in their strength alone, but in their refusal to let go of the work of becoming. The galaxy turned, dangers persisted, and somewhere between collapse and continuity, hands reached out, adapted, and held on.